The wind howls low through the pines, sweeping across a desolate stretch of snow-covered wilderness. A slow drone shot glides above the forest, descending over the skeletal remains of what once was a town, cabins collapsed inward like broken ribs, windows blackened with frost. There is no movement, just the creak of old wood and the mournful rustle of bare branches. On one porch, an open journal flutters weakly in the breeze, its pages yellowed, ink smeared by time and cold. A pair of tiny children's boots sit half buried. In the snow nearby, the leather cracked, the laces frozen stiff. Narrator, asterisk, when state authorities arrived. There were no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just 29 empty homes, fires still burning in hearths, dinner set on tables, and a silence so thick they say it swallowed the air. Asterisk, a single haunting piano chord echoes under the words, distant and hollow, like something remembered too late. The camera lingers on a broken swing swaying gently in the wind, the chains groaning softly. Faded Christmas decorations still cling to some of the doors. A plastic Santa, an angel missing a face. Inside one window, a record player spins in eerie silence, the needle scratching at its center. There are no footprints, no drag marks, no signs of a hurried exit, just the sense that time stopped abruptly without warning. Narrator, quieter, deeper. Asterisk, what happened to the people of Briar Creek? That cold January night in 1978, and why has no one ever come back? Asterisk, the music fades into static as the screen turns to black. Asterisk, asterisk, title card appears. Asterisk, 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 the village that died in one night. What happened to Briar Creek? Asterisk, asterisk, the camera zooms in from a satellite view of the United States, cutting through a thick layer of clouds to settle on the dense, jagged ridges of the Appalachian Mountains. A red pinpoint appears, West Virginia, then, deeper, past the coal towns and hollers, where the roads vanish and the forest begins to reclaim the land, to a remote valley shadowed by snow-draped peaks. There lies Briar Creek, or rather, what remains of it, narrator : asterisk, nestled deep within the Appalachian wilderness. Briar Creek wasn't on most maps. A coal town long forgotten by the outside world. 31 residents, all gone overnight. Asterisk, archival winter footage flickers. On screen, old 8mm reels, slightly warped. Children bundled in thick coats laugh as they pull sleds down a frozen hill. A man shovels coal into a stove, his face dark with soot. A woman pins laundry in the bitter wind, her fingers raw, her expression distant. Life in Briar Creek was quiet, isolated, harsh, and entirely self-contained. Narrator continues. Asterisk, it was a village suspended in time and fear. Asterisk, the image fades into a still photo. The town's main street, just 3 structures visible, a general store, a church, and a small tavern, all blanketed in snow. Then whispers, faint, overlapping. A woman murmuring about asterisk, a curse on the mountain. A child's voice, breathy. Asterisk, don't follow the lights. A raspy old man. Asterisk, some things in them woods ain't right. Asterisk, the soundscape deepens, the wind rising, almost speaking, the creak of trees bending under unseen weight, the hiss of distant static. Folklore runs deep in Appalachia. Briar Creek was no exception. Stories of shadow things in the pines, of lights that danced across the ridgelines, of voices calling from the dark. passed down in hushed tones, told only when the fire burned low. In towns like this, legends weren't entertainment, they were warnings. The screen fades to black, but the wind lingers. Narrator, asterisk, and in January of 1978, something came down off that mountain, something that silenced a town forever. Asterisk, the screen flickers to life with faded Polaroids, sun-washed, smiles, snow-covered porches, the stiff poses of small-town life, captured in happier, uneventful days. One by one, the faces emerge, the people of Briar Creek. Not numbers, not statistics, but names, histories, lives interrupted mid-sentence. Narrator, asterisk, these were not faceless victims. They were farmers, widows, schoolchildren. A community with routines, rituals, and secrets. Asterisk, at the heart of Briar Creek was Ezekiel Harper, the village elder and former pastor of the shuttered Briar Creek Chapel. In the only surviving photo of him, brittle and sepia-toned, Ezekiel stands tall in a threadbare wool coat, hands clasped before him, eyes distant. Revered by some, feared by others, Ezekiel was known for his rigid faith, his cryptic sermons, and his obsession with keeping the old ways alive. Many say he was the glue that held the isolated town together. Others whisper that he was something else entirely, a gatekeeper to the town's darker past. Then there were the Linwoods, a young family of 5. David and Ruth, both in their 30s, worked the land and ran a small, unofficial schoolhouse for the children. Their 3 kids, James, Leah, and baby Emily, were often seen playing near the creek that gave the village its name. Well-liked, warm, and generous, the Linwoods represented hope in a place otherwise stuck in time. On the night of the disappearance, their dinner table was still set, plates of venison stew untouched, glasses half full of cider, their front door left wide open to the snow. May Thurston, just 16, was the town's quiet observer, artistic, withdrawn, known for sketching strange images in the margins of her schoolbooks, twisted trees, shadowy figures, symbols no one could explain. She was last seen walking alone near the woods the evening before the town vanished. Locals say she looked over her shoulder often, that she was talking to someone they couldn't see. According to folklore, May might have been the last to be seen. Her notebook, later recovered, would become one of the few pieces of unsettling evidence left behind. When the silence of Briar Creek was first reported, Sheriff Arlen Booker was the man who responded. A decorated Vietnam vet turned small-town lawman. Booker was used to moonshine disputes and missing livestock, not ghost towns. He arrived to find fires still flickering in stoves, radios humming, static, and a village without a soul in sight. In his report, never released to the public, he allegedly wrote one line that's been quoted in conspiracy circles ever since. Asterisk, it was like God pressed pause, and then walked away. Asterisk, and then there's Claire Harper, granddaughter of Ezekiel, a woman who left Briar Creek at 18, vowing never to return. Years later, she would break her silence in a series of recorded interviews, claiming that something had been wrong with the town for decades, that her grandfather kept a journal, that rituals were held in the woods, out of sight, that she tried to warn someone, anyone, but no one listened. Their stories form a puzzle with too many missing pieces. But each of these people, Ezekiel, the Linwoods, May, Sheriff Booker, Claire, were more than just footnotes in a mystery. They were the keys. If there are answers, they lie within the lives they led, and the secrets they tried to keep. 3. Weeks before the people of Briar Creek vanished, the first signs of something strange began to ripple through the valley, quiet at first, almost dismissible. But in retrospect, the signs were there. The warning had already begun, and no one knew how to read it. It started with the lights. On the night of January 2nd, several residents reported seeing pale blue orbs weaving through the forest ridge that flanked the eastern edge of the town. They weren't lanterns, they weren't headlights. They floated, silent, erratic, blinking in and out of the fog like fireflies that had forgotten how to die. According to recovered testimony from Claire Harper, her grandfather Ezekiel saw them from the church window and muttered under his breath, "They've come again." When she asked what he meant, he refused to explain, just locked the chapel door and lit a candle. Then came the humming. Residents described it as a low, vibrating drone, mechanical yet alive, that would swell under the floorboards and fade before you could trace it. It came only after dark, and always in patterns. 3 hums, silence. 2 hums, silence. Then 1 long pulse that rattled dishes in cabinets and sent dogs into fits. One teenage boy, Thomas Meeks, told a friend he heard it right under his bed. That same friend, in a recovered letter, wrote, "Tommy says they live under the trees now. He doesn't go near the creek anymore." Tommy would disappear a week later, assumed to have run away. But his boots were found still laced beside the creek, the laces stiff with frost. His footprints ended mid-stride in the snow. A week later, the livestock deaths began. At first, it was just a goat found with its throat slit clean, no blood on the ground. Then a pig, then another, then a whole pen of chickens, all mutilated, in the same precise, bloodless manner. There were no signs of struggle, no paw prints, no broken fences. The animals weren't eaten, just laid out like offerings. Sheriff Booker investigated but found nothing he could explain. He made no arrests, only advised locals to stay indoors after dusk, something they were already doing by instinct. Around this time, the village began to experience complete power. Failures, not individual outages, but what locals began to call blackouts. All electricity gone, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. Generators sputtered and died. Radios stopped. Flashlights dimmed and would not respond to fresh batteries. The only lights that remained were candles, and those same flickering orbs seen outside the tree line, as if something larger than the grid had shut it all down. It wasn't just physical. Something began working its way into the minds of the people. A shared dread, the kind that makes you check behind you, even when you know you're alone. Recovered journal entries from residents show a sharp shift in tone. The handwriting gets tighter, the lines more erratic, the content darker. One reads simply, "There's something in the trees. It knows I see it." Another, "We are being watched, not by men." May Thurston's notebook, found later in the snow, is filled with frantic drawings, tall, faceless figures standing in doorways. Circles within circles, eyes, trees with roots shaped like claws. On one page, in red pencil, she scrawled, "Don't answer when it knocks." Children complained of whispers in the night. Not dreams, whispers. Specific phrases, repeated. Again and again. Come see. We miss you. Open the door. One little girl told her mother a man with no face stood in the field behind their house. He didn't move, He didn't speak. He just watched her until the sun came up. Most adults brush these off. Imagination, cabin fever, the cold doing strange things to the mind. But when 3 teenagers went into the woods on a dare and returned shaken and silent, something changed. They wouldn't speak, wouldn't sleep. 2 weeks later, one of them, Elijah Manners, began screaming in the middle of the night, insisting his skin was wrong. His family sedated him. The next morning, he was gone. The back door was open. His footprints in the snow led to the edge of the woods, and then simply stopped. Claire Harper, in one of her later interviews, said her grandfather began fasting, praying loudly at night. He nailed crosses to the doors and warned her not to look at the lights. When she asked why, he told her, once, "You see them, they remember you." No official reports were filed about these events. The town had no phone lines, no media presence, and no interest in inviting outside help. That was the way Briar Creek had always operated, self-contained, suspicious of outsiders, bound by something older than law. But paranoia had gripped the village. Neighbors stopped visiting each other. School was suspended. Children were kept inside. Meals were left uneaten. And yet, no one left. Despite everything, they stayed. Then, on the night of January 25th, 1978, the whispers stopped. The humming went silent. The lights vanished by morning. So had the town. By the second week of January 1978, the atmosphere in Briar Creek had grown heavy, not just with snow and cold, but with something unseen, something crawling beneath the skin of the town. The villagers, once bound by community, tradition, and daily routine, began to unravel. What had once been a tight-knit settlement of 31 people now looked like a group quietly preparing for siege, not from outsiders, but from something none of them could name. Narrator, something was changing in Briar Creek. The townsfolk stopped gathering. Windows were nailed shut. Sermons became darker, apocalyptic. Drone footage recreates the narrow, frozen streets, as homes once open and welcoming now show signs of paranoia. Curtains drawn, crosses hung on doors, snow shoveled only in tight, precise patterns, as if people feared disturbing whatever lay beneath. The air itself seemed different, still, heavy, expectant at the chapel. Services continued, but they were no longer about hope or salvation. According to Claire Harper, her grandfather Ezekiel, once a man of gentle scripture and parables, had begun preaching fire. He spoke of the cleansing of the eye that sees, and of a debt long overdue. He abandoned the New Testament entirely, reading instead from torn pages of Ezekiel and Revelation. His voice, once calm and kind, now trembled with fervor. Witnesses say he would pause mid-sermon, as if listening to something no one else could hear, before returning to the pulpit with tears streaming down his face. Around this time, the town received an unexpected visitor, a traveling salesman named Roy Madsen, who worked a regional hardware circuit. He checked into the general store's back room for the night on January 14th. According to receipts and one fragment of a recovered ledger, he purchased kerosene and a flashlight, and then, like everyone else, he vanished. His truck was found, parked neatly beside the chapel, keys still in the ignition, the passenger door ajar. A single business card was discovered under the seat. It read simply, "He who knocks shall not always find welcome." No missing persons report was ever filed by Briar Creek authorities. In fact, According to records later obtained from the Briar County Sheriff's Office, no one from the town contacted outside law enforcement at all. When concerned relatives from nearby towns tried to call or send letters, nothing came back. One woman, sister of Ruth Linwood, said in a taped interview decades later, *, I sent a letter every week, got nothing, so I called, and all I got was that strange tone, not a busy signal, not a ring, just that hum. *, 2 full weeks passed without any response from the county. Snowfall had made the roads impassable, and Briar Creek, never connected to the main state power grid or telephone lines, sat alone in the deep woods like a fading ember. Whether this isolation was by design or coincidence remains a point of debate among researchers and conspiracy theorists alike. What is known is that not everyone in town was willing to wait in silence. On the night of January 18th, the Collins family, a young couple with a newborn, tried to leave. They packed their belongings quickly, loaded into their station wagon, and headed east toward the river road, the only passable route out of the valley. They never arrived at the next town. 2 days later, their car was found half submerged at the edge of the Briar River. The engine was still running, the headlights still on. No damage, no blood. Just empty seats and a baby blanket, soaking wet, tangled in the brush nearby. That discovery sent a ripple of fear through the remaining residents. Some took it as a sign there would be no escape. Others began speaking quietly, and only to those they trusted, about Reckoning Day. The phrase appears in several recovered documents, in the margins of May Thurston's notebook, etched into the wall of the general store's cellar, and scrawled on a page of Ezekiel Harper's personal journal. According to Claire, her grandfather spoke of it as a final trial, a necessary sacrifice for purity of the soul. Whether this was metaphor, delusion, or doctrine remains unclear. But the term spread. The tone of conversation shifted, from fear to resignation, as if the town had collectively accepted something inevitable. An ancient dot in a rare surviving audio recording, a tape found buried in a trunk beneath the church floorboards. The voice of Ezekiel can be heard. The eye watchers. The time draws near. We must be still. We must be clean. The reckoning is not punishment. It is passage. What passage he meant is unknown. But it's clear that by the final days, whatever sense of logic, survival, or rebellion remained in Briar Creek had been overwritten by something older, an idea, a belief, perhaps even a contagion of the mind. The silence that had begun as fear had matured into devotion. Some would call it mass delusion, others a spiritual awakening. Some say it was a cult. Others believe the town was preparing for something that did, in fact, come. The town stopped responding. Mail stopped moving. The general store closed its doors. Candles burned constantly. No one went into the forest. No one came out. And still no outside help arrived. No rescue teams, no police, no phone calls answered as January 24th faded. Into the 25th, a snowstorm rolled in, one of the worst in recent memory. Visibility dropped to near zero. Temperatures plummeted. According to county weather reports, lightning was seen striking the ridgeline just before midnight. Rare for that time of year. Some say the lights returned that night. Others say the humming stopped. But what is certain is this: by dawn on January 26th, Briar Creek was empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Fires still warm. Meals still laid out. and an entire town erased, not in violence, but in absence. What remains are the records, the whispers, the drawings, the unanswered calls, and the overwhelming sense that in those final days, the people of Briar Creek weren't simply afraid. They were preparing for what? That question still echoes in the snow. January 11th, 1978, a date that would later be marked quietly, unofficially, as the true beginning of the end for Briar Creek. It began like any other bitter, bone-deep winter. Morning. Snow blanketed the roads in heavy drifts. Wood smoke curled through the trees. The town remained tense, quiet, holding its collective breath as it had for weeks. But that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and the temperature fell sharply, Claire Harper vanished. Witnesses last saw her walking alone along the southern edge of the forest near the disused mining path. She had argued earlier that day with her grandfather, Ezekiel, during a sermon in the chapel. According to one listener, she had stood up, trembling, and said only, "You're lying to them." Then she left, no coat, no bag, just herself, swallowed by trees. When search efforts began the next morning, they found only a trail of boot prints Claire's leading into the woods. They continued for roughly 40 yards before ending abruptly in a clearing near the old mine shaft. Return prints. No disturbance of snow. Just one small object lying half buried at the edge of a tree, a silver locket, blood-stained, cracked. Inside was a photograph of Claire as a child, standing beside her grandmother. Both are smiling. The glass over the grandmother's face was shattered. For 48 hours, Claire was gone. No one spoke her name aloud. Not even Ezekiel. Then, without warning, she reappeared. She was found by Ruth Linwood, kneeling in the church doorway just before sunrise on January 13th. Her clothes were soaked, torn in several places. Her bare hands were raw, her feet frostbitten, but her expression was blank, like she'd forgotten how to be human. She wouldn't respond to questions, wouldn't eat, wouldn't cry, wouldn't blink unless spoken to. Finally, after nearly an hour of silence, Claire whispered one sentence. They're not who you think they are. No further explanation. No answers. That night, Ezekiel reportedly barred all doors to the chapel and called a private gathering of the remaining elders. No notes were taken, no minutes kept. Whatever was discussed never left that room. The next morning, Claire was taken by sled to the nearest ranger station and, from there, to Western State Hospital over 70 miles away. She was officially diagnosed with acute catatonia and placed under psychiatric observation. But something in the transfer caught the attention of federal authorities. Records show that by January 15th, Claire Harper's file was flagged and sealed under a national security directive. The attending doctor, who spoke anonymously years later, claimed a plainclothes official from Washington visited the hospital and personally removed portions of Claire's medical chart. The doctor's exact words, "they didn't ask. They took, and they said if I spoke about it, I'd never practice again." The same night Claire returned to Briar Creek. Another inexplicable event occurred. The town's only working radio station, WBRK 570 AM, went silent. Operated from a small shed behind the general store. The station was manned part-time by Elijah Manners and, occasionally, David Linwood. It broadcast local updates, weather, church announcements, and music. Just after 9:17 p.m., the signal began to distort. Listeners in neighboring towns reported static, then humming, then what sounded like a burst of backwards speech, decipherable and brief, then silence. The signal never returned. Attempts by radio operators to contact WBRK the following day were met with nothing. No answering tones, no relay bounce. The frequency was, quite literally, gone that night. A federal monitoring post, based in Charleston, noted a disturbance in low-band frequencies across Briar County. The anomaly lasted 4 minutes. No cause was ever determined. Internal. Documents refer to it as an electromagnetic null pulse. After that night, no further communications were recorded from Briar Creek. No calls, no letters, no radio, just a deep, spreading silence. Locals in nearby towns began to grow uneasy. Delivery trucks stopped running routes to the village, piled high on the road leading in. When 2 amateur hikers tried to reach the town a week later, they turned back, both claiming the forest had changed. One reported hearing voices in the trees, calling him by name. The other refused to speak at all for several months. Claire Harper remained in Weston for 9 months. During that time, she spoke only twice. The first, to a night nurse, she asked, "Do you see them too?" The second, she said while staring into a blank television screen, "It doesn't matter. The town's already gone." She was discharged in October of 1978, under unclear circumstances. Her remaining records are still classified to this day. January 11th is viewed by investigators and folklore researchers alike as the turning point. The moment the village crossed an invisible threshold, when one of its own returned, changed, the mechanisms of silence, already long in motion, began to close in fully, because from that day forward, Briar Creek would never be heard from again. Briar Creek was never just another remote Appalachian village. From the very beginning, it was different by design. Founded in the late 1800s by a splinter group of Millerite descendants, the town was rooted in a strict and deeply insular belief system. The Millerites, known for their failed doomsday prophecy in 1844, the Great Disappointment fractured in the decades that followed. One such offshoot, known only in private records as the Watchful, retreated deeper into the mountains of West Virginia, carrying with them a theology steeped in apocalyptic symbolism, isolation, and the promise of divine cleansing. Briar Creek was the result. The original settlers believed that the outside world was irredeemably corrupted. Cities were seen as dens of sin, and even neighboring towns were treated with suspicion. They built their lives around prophesied typically, the notion that only total spiritual purity would allow them to survive what they referred to as the hollowing. What the hollowing actually entailed remains debated. Some surviving journals describe it as a removal of the unclean from within. Others frame it as a kind of reckoning, an internal purge meant to prepare the faithful for the arrival of the Watcher in the silence. It wasn't a metaphor. For these people, prophecy was not symbolic. It was a blueprint. In 1891, records suggests that a major event occurred, though local archives are sparse and official accounts non-existent, referred to cryptically in handwritten church notes as the first hollowing. It is believed to have involved the ritualistic disappearance or execution of at least 12 residents. No bodies were ever found, no graves marked, just a journal entry by the town's first preacher. They screamed when it began, but when the trees took them, they were quiet. By the 1930s, Briar Creek had already cemented its isolation, but even then, rumors leaked out. Traveling merchants spoke of strange chants heard in the woods at night, of symbols carved into trees that resembled neither Christian nor known occult markings, of children with wild eyes reciting hymns backward. During the Great Depression, as desperation gripped the region, several nearby towns accused Briar Creek's inhabitants of witchcraft and ritualistic behavior. These accusations, dismissed by authorities at the time, included claims of animal sacrifice, grave desecration, and the summoning of weather spirits. One particularly disturbing story comes from a mining town just 10 miles south Ash Holloway in 1933. A woman named Miriam Bowl claimed she escaped from Briar Creek after being held there for ritual cleansing. She described masked figures, strange lights, and a pit that hummed deep in the forest. Her claims were dismissed as hysteria. She died 2 years later in Asana, or Ash Hollow. Itself would become a ghost town by 1941. Its residents vanished in what was officially deemed an economic migration, but the eerie similarity of complete abandonment mirrors what would later happen in Briar Creek. And it wasn't the only one. At least 3 nearby settlements, Spine Fallow, Miller's Bend, and Stag Row, experienced unexplained disappearances or sudden desertion between 1890 and 1950, each within a 30-mile radius, each with no clear cause. Through it all, Briar Creek endured. What held the town together for so long was its seamless blending of religious faith and deeper, more arcane traditions. Ezekiel Harper, who would later become the town elder, was raised in this environment steeped in fire and brimstone, sermons laced with references to purification and sight beyond the veil. He was not just a preacher, he was a keeper of the old ways. In his journals, which remain partially censored by federal agencies, Ezekiel refers often to the eye that watches, the blood gate, and a concept he calls echo memory, a belief that certain places remember trauma and respond to it. Many researchers now believe Briar Creek functioned less as a town and more as a closed generational sector, theocratic society with cult-like patterns carefully hidden beneath layers of biblical language. Outsiders were tolerated but never welcomed. Outsider ideas, even less, and always whispers of the hollowing. In hindsight, the 1978 disappearance was not an isolated event, but the final chapter in a much older story, one of ritual, secrecy, and belief taken to its furthest edge. What happened to Briar Creek may not have started that year. It may have simply concluded. When the world finally took notice of Briar Creek, it was already too late. By February 2nd, 1978, nearly a full week after the last confirmed observation of the town-state authorities made their way up the narrow, snow-packed road that cut through the Appalachian wilderness. What they found would become one of the most baffling cold cases in American history. 29 homes, empty and undisturbed, no bodies, no signs of a struggle. Fires still smouldering in hearths, meals left half-eaten, doors open, beds turned down, and no evidence of forced entry or exit. It was as if the people of Briar Creek had simply stopped existing. Narrator, asterisk, the official investigation was brief. A weather-related evacuation was cited, but no weather anomaly was ever recorded, and no evacuees ever emerged. Asterisk, that statement, released by the West Virginia Office of Emergency Management, was the only public comment ever made. Internally, however, something far more unusual was unfolding. Police reports were heavily redacted. Pages disappeared. Eyewitness accounts from first responders, Those few who dared speak off record were inconsistent, often contradictory. Some mentioned strange symbols found burned into floorboards. Others recalled a smell in the air that made their ears ring. One officer allegedly began screaming upon entering the Linwood residence and was later hospitalized for severe psychological distress. What followed was silence. A perimeter was established. The road into Briar Creek was closed indefinitely, and behind the scenes, the federal government stepped in. Documents obtained decades later through Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) requests confirm that by mid-February 1978, agents from multiple departments, Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and even an unnamed civilian behavioral division had begun combing the area. One file, titled simply Operation Grey Hollow, references non-conforming time indicators, infrasound mapping, and proximity-based neurological anomalies. Nearly every page after that point is blacked out in the absence of concrete evidence or public transparency. Theories began to emerge, more bizarre and yet strangely more plausible than the last. One of the earliest theories was mass suicide. That somehow, under the influence of a shared ideology perhaps fueled by isolation, fear, or religious fervor, the townspeople willingly ended their lives in a coordinated event. But this theory collapses under scrutiny. No bodies were ever found, no burial sites, no blood, no indication of ritual death. Even the wells were clean, and animals, livestock, dogs, birds were gone too. Not dead, just gone. Another theory connects Briar Creek to known CIA psychological operations from the Cold War era, specifically Project Stargate and MKUltra. Both involved extensive experiments into mind control, psychic perception, and psychological warfare using hallucinogens, sensory manipulation, and electromagnetic fields. Declassified records confirm several test sites were located throughout the Appalachian Corridor. One set of coordinates from a Stargate mission report falls within 12 miles of Briar Creek. Some researchers speculate the town may have been used, knowingly or not, as a live testbed for frequency-based mind disruption, potentially leading to collective psychosis or group disappearance under experimental duress. The problem that would still require relocation, and no trace of anyone was ever found, not even in regional hospitals, shelters, or death registries. There is also the so-called gas leak theory, popularized in the early 1980s by a team of chemists who suggested that a natural geological rupture might have released toxic or psychoactive gases into the atmosphere. This could, in theory, cause hallucinations, mass confusion, even memory loss or flight behavior. Hydrogen sulfide, for example, is known to produce auditory hallucinations, but extensive geological surveys in the 1990s found no such fault lines near Briar Creek, and no toxins were ever detected in soil or air samples. Another theory, favored by conspiracy circles and paranormal researchers alike, is mass abduction or, depending on the lens, a cultic ascension event. This posits that the residents of Briar Creek either made contact with a non-human intelligence or believed they had voluntarily departed this reality. Some even linked this theory to so-called thin places in Appalachian lore, locations where the veil between worlds is believed to wear thin. Supporting this idea are the town's historic roots in prophetic isolationism and numerous references to the hollowing as a form of passage or elevation. But perhaps the most enduring theory is the one rooted not in science or government, secrecy, but folklore. Locals across the region, especially older generations, have long told stories of the Hollow, a formless entity said to dwell beneath the Appalachian earth. According to oral legends dating back to the late 1700s, the Hollow is not a creature, but a presence, watching, listening, ancient intelligence tied to the land. It chooses certain places, certain groups, and waits. It feeds not on bodies, but on silence, secrecy, and fear. In several versions of the tale, those who invoke the Hollow are granted visions, power, or deliverance, but at the cost of their identity, their memory, even their physical existence. They are unwritten. In May Thurston's recovered notebook, one line appears over and over. Asterisk, we'll all go into the Hollow. We'll be echoes, and then we'll be free. Asterisk, experts from various fields have weighed in over the years, though few agree on a single cause. Dr. Helen Yarrow, a psychologist specializing in mass hysteria, proposed a hybrid theory, what she called environmental psychogenic syndrome. In her model, isolation, religious belief, extreme weather, and shared trauma could lead to collective delusion strong enough to erase memory, identity, even speech. But even she admits, asterisk, delusion doesn't make people physically vanish. It doesn't explain a missing town. Asterisk, Dr. Ray Martinez, an acoustics researcher with a background in military contracts, suggested infrasound frequencies, too low for human hearing, could explain the humming noises, the erratic behavior, the blackouts. Such sound, especially at specific amplitudes, has been known to induce anxiety, nausea, hallucinations, and even feelings of dread or divine presence. But again, that still doesn't account for the missing people, the lack of bodies, or the total absence of any living thing. Other fringe theorists argue that Briar Creek experienced a temporal events, something akin to a missing time phenomenon, where the town either entered another dimensional layer or was erased in a nonlinear moment of time collapse. There is no empirical evidence for this, of course, just anecdotes and silence to this day. No unified theory explains what happened. The government remains tight-lipped. FOIA requests are routinely denied. The area remains closed to the public. Under the vague designation of environmental instability, Briar Creek is still marked on some old maps, but roads no longer lead there. The land has been reforested. The town is officially listed as abandoned due to hazardous weather. Though no such hazard was ever recorded, no one has rebuilt. No one has returned. Even hikers avoid the area, and through it all, the questions persist. What happened to those 31 people in January of 1978? What made them disappear without a trace? And why nearly 50 years later, do some who walked too close to the old ridgeline still report hearing voices? No one knows. But if you ask the locals, they'll tell you the same thing. Asterisk, don't go looking for Briar Creek, because if you find it, it might find you back. Asterisk, within just 1 week of the discovery at Briar Creek, the media narrative had already begun to fragment violently, chaotically, and almost as if by design. What began as a small, confusing story tucked into the back pages of local newspapers quickly erupted into a national curiosity, and then, just as quickly, a punchline. One headline claimed a mass suicide, another warned of satanic cult activity in West Virginia's haunted hills. A third reported a freak weather event that triggered hallucinations and flight behavior. Each version contradicted the last. None matched the official responder reports, and all avoided the same core fact: 31 people had vanished. No bodies, no signs of death, just absence. Narrator: ****. Within a week, media outlets gave wildly different stories. Cult suicide, carbon monoxide leak, satanic panic, but none aligned with the scene responders found. *ABC ran a brief special on the vanishing village, but ended the segment by suggesting that perhaps the residents had simply walked away from their lives, lost in a religious delusion. Local affiliates ran with that theory, painting Briar Creek as a backwoods compound run by doomsday fanatics who had evacuated en masse and were likely living off the grid. A week later, newscasters changed the narrative again, this time blaming a carbon monoxide leak from faulty coal stoves. That theory, too, fell apart under scrutiny. The town had functioning chimneys, and autopsies anywhere ever conducted were never reported. The confusion was no accident. Internal memos obtained years later revealed that multiple agencies, including the FBI and the Department of Energy, issued conflicting statements to the press. The goal, according to one redacted file, was to obfuscate and destabilize the narrative to preserve operational integrity. What operation that referred to remains unknown. Meanwhile, inside the county, cracks were forming. Sheriff Arlen Booker, first on the scene, a decorated officer, and the man who had quietly tried to raise alarms before the town vanished, resigned suddenly. No press conference, no farewell. He left behind only a one-line resignation letter. *I saw what I saw. I won't lie about it. Within days, he disappeared from public record. His family declined interviews. Rumors suggested he moved out west under a different name. Others believe he was institutionalized. One theory even claims he never left, he just stopped being seen. Even stranger was the case of Special Agent Daniel Harrow, part of a federal team dispatched to conduct a second investigation in 1984. His team spent 3 days in the Briar Creek zone before reporting equipment interference and magnetic irregularities near the former town center. On the 4th day, Harrow vanished during a solo sweep of the woods. His radio crackled for 10 minutes, broadcasting only static and what one technician claimed sounded like reversed speech. No trace of Harrow was ever found. His body, his gear, even his footprints, gone. The case remains open but classified. Further confusion came from documentation itself. A Freedom of Information Act release in 1997 uncovered a supposedly official evacuation order for Briar Creek, allegedly signed on January 25, 1978, hours before authorities arrived. But the signature on the document belonged to a man named Kenneth R. Doyle, a civil defense coordinator who, according to multiple records, had died in a car accident in 1972. The signature matched exactly same slant, same pressure, same notary stamp. Investigators dismissed it as a clerical error. Others weren't so sure. Public fascination with the Briar Creek case peaked in the early 80s, then quickly collapsed under the weight of contradiction. Television specials treated it like fiction. Radio hosts lumped it into Bigfoot and alien abduction stories. Late night comedians made it the punchline of rural stereotypes. What was once an unnerving, legitimate mystery became a kind of cultural static, too inconsistent to be believed, too strange to be ignored. Soon, Briar Creek became what all unsolved tragedies eventually become in the American psyche, an urban legend. Some say the people joined a cult and crossed into Canada. Others claimed the entire town was swallowed into the earth. One fringe theory suggests a military experiment went wrong and the government erased the residents digitally and physically. But every time an answer came close to gaining traction, a new contradiction surfaced, another document lost, another witness recanting, another redacted report citing national interests. The town itself became myth. Maps slowly removed. The road signs were taken down. New developments were planned nearby, but never completed. The land was declared unstable for residential use, and quietly annexed by a conservation trust with federal backing. Over time, the story faded buried, not because it lacked evidence, but because it had too much, pointing in too many directions. Mass hallucination, gas leak, suicide, UFOs, cult ritual, government operation, paranormal event. None of them fit the facts. All of them obscured the truth, and to this day, no one has been able to explain why an entire town could disappear without a trace, while the world around it refused to ask the right questions. Every file brings more shadows. Every theory breeds more doubt, and every silence, official or otherwise, sounds a little too deliberate, because maybe Briar Creek wasn't meant to be solved. Maybe it was meant to be forgotten. Not everyone stayed silent. In the years following the disappearance of Briar Creek, scattered voices attempted to speak, frightened and often dismissed. Some came forward quietly through interviews never aired. Others left behind strange recordings, journals, or overheard conversations that, at the time, were deemed untrustworthy, even delusional. But decades later, these overlooked testimony, under ridicule, red tape, or intentional suppression, paint a darker, more complex picture of what may have really happened. Narrator, asterisk, some people tried to speak, but their words were lost in static, silence, or threats. Asterisk, in 1996, nearly 2 decades after the town's vanishing, a series of audio tapes were anonymously mailed to a local radio archivist in Charleston, West Virginia. The return address was untraceable. Inside were 4 cassettes, unlabeled except for one word scrawled in pencil on each Claire. The voice on the tapes was later confirmed, through voice analysis, to be that of Claire Harper, the same Claire who had vanished for 48 hours in 1978 and was later institutionalized at Western State Hospital. The recordings are haunting. Claire speaks in a soft, disjointed whisper, her voice trembling and slurred as if speaking from a place far removed from time. One tape is nearly silent, save for the sound of distant humming and intermittent scratching. But in another, clear, words emerge. Asterisk, they met under the moon. The offering was made. Not all of them knew. Some just watched. Others welcomed it. Asterisk, there's no mention of what it was. No names, no dates, but the tone is unmistakable witness to something unspeakable. In another moment, she breaks into crying and repeats a single sentence 5 times. Asterisk, the trees remembered. They never forgot what we buried. Asterisk, the tapes were dismissed by law enforcement as inauthentic, but audio experts found no signs of tampering, and Claire's identity was never disputed. The origin of the recordings remains unknown. Another overlooked voice belonged to a man named Raymond Kell, a forest ranger who worked along the Briar Creek Trail system in the late 1970s. In his final recorded radio transmission from January 12, 1978, less than 2 weeks before the village vanished, he sent out a message to his ranger station. Asterisk, visual contact lost with East Ridge. Strange light on the tree line. No response from town. I repeat, there's something here with us. Asterisk, then silence. When his fellow rangers arrived 3 hours later, they found Kell's snowmobile overturned near the creek. No sign of a struggle. Just deep, symmetrical burn marks on the snow 6 feet apart, circular, and melted clean through to the soil. Raymond Kell was never seen again. His disappearance was attributed to accidental exposure. The transmission was archived and forgotten until it surfaced decades later through a leaked internal tape. Inside Western State Hospital, where Claire Harper was held for 9 months. Yet another voice quietly tried to speak. Thomas Weaver, a night janitor who worked in the secure ward during Claire's stay, gave a sworn interview in 1987 to a local journalist investigating the case. Weaver recalled Claire as eerily quiet, but disturbingly alert. She rarely spoke, but often scratched symbols into her room's walls, ceiling tiles, and even the underside of her bed frame. It wasn't random, he said. Asterisk, they were always in threes, circles, eyes, trees with their roots flipped upside down. Sometimes she'd be asleep, and her hands would still move like she was drawing. Asterisk, when he reported the carvings to hospital administrators, they had the room repainted and sealed. Later, he was reassigned to another wing. He claims he was warned never to speak about Claire again. When pressed about why he waited to speak out, he said, simply, asterisk, because the day she left, I had a dream that the same thing would happen here. And I'm not ashamed to say I believe her. Asterisk, other hidden voices emerged sporadically, almost like echoes. A ham radio operator in Virginia claimed to have intercepted a strange broadcast in the early hours of January 26, 1978, just before dawn. The transmission was faint, layered beneath static and music, but he insisted he heard a young woman's voice say, asterisk, we're not alone, they're under us. The sky has changed. Asterisk, another testimony, obtained from an elderly nurse in 2002, described a government man who came to Western Hospital in early 1978 and asked to see the Harper girl. She remembers him wearing no badge, carrying no briefcase, and speaking in a flat, practiced voice. After that visit, Claire's records were sealed. The nurse said, asterisk, he wasn't there to ask questions. He was there to make sure no one else did. Asterisk, still, these accounts were discarded. Official investigations ignored them. News outlets refused to publish them. The broader narrative of Briar Creek had already been reduced to speculation and parody. These voices, raw and fragile, couldn't cut through the noise, but together they form a pattern, a web of warnings. The moon, the trees, the offering, the symbols. Each witness saw only a sliver, but every sliver pointed in the same chilling direction. Something happened in Briar Creek that no one wanted remembered. Something that left echoes in the minds of the few who got close enough to hear it. And while most of those witnesses are now gone, discredited, disappeared, or dismissed, their words remain fragmented, faint. But if you listen closely, they still whisper the same truth. Asterisk, it didn't start in 1978. It didn't end either. Asterisk, in 2007, nearly 3 decades after Briar Creek had slipped from the public eye and faded into folklore, something surfaced, something tangible. A local history enthusiast named Benjamin Rusk, part of a regional amateur exploration group, hiked into the overgrown ruins of the town. Armed with an old surveyor's map, a handheld camcorder, and curiosity sharpened by years of obsession. His goal was simple: document what little remained of Briar Creek before time buried it completely. What he found beneath the foundation of the old schoolhouse would ignite a new wave of fear and fascination. Narrator, asterisk, In 2007, an amateur explorer discovered something beneath the old schoolhouse, a cellar filled with hundreds of preserved dolls, each with stitched shut eyes, and names of villagers carved into their backs. The footage is grainy, dimly lit, and drenched in dust. But it's real. In the film, Rusk pushes aside a decayed chalkboard, revealing a small hatch in the floor bolted shut with rusted hardware. Inside is a narrow staircase descending into the earth, untouched for decades. What he discovers at the bottom is beyond explanation. Row after row of shelves, hand-carved, each holding dozens of dolls, hundreds in total. Their faces are eerily lifelike. Not porcelain, not plastic made from some waxy fibrous material. Every doll has its eyes sewn shut with coarse black thread, and carved into each of their backs, with a precision that suggests ritual. Our names. Rusk reported seeing names that matched those of the vanished villagers. Linwood, Harper, Thurston, Manners, Bell. Some dolls were small, others adult-sized. One was missing a head entirely, and in its place was a clump of human hair, sealed under glass. The cellar had no signs of modern entry, no dust disturbed, just waiting. Quiet. Authorities sealed off the area shortly after Rusk posted the photage online. The video was taken down within 48 hours, cited as a privacy violation. Rusk himself disappeared 6 months later. His family claimed he had gone hiking in Tennessee. He never returned. That same year, a team of independent researchers led by Dr. Lewis Haldane, a forensic anthropologist from Ohio, secured access to old mining tunnels near Briar Creek's collapsed coal shaft. Local folklore had long warned of these mines, calling them the hollows below. What Haldane's team found there still disturbs the academic community to this day. Deep in the tunnel, some 200 feet down, they uncovered skeletal remains, human but not consistent with modern anatomy. The bones were small, child-sized, but showed signs of premature aging calcification patterns more akin to adults. The skulls were elongated, the jawbones underdeveloped. Initial carbon dating placed the bones as pre-1900, yet no known records show any burials or even use of the mine before the town was settled in the 1880s. Stranger still, several of the femurs had been hollowed. Not broken, hollowed, cleanly, deliberately, as news of the findings began to circulate in academic circles. All access to the site was revoked. Federal agents cited geological instability and unauthorized excavation. Dr. Haldane's research grant was suspended. When asked to comment in a 2008 interview, he simply said, "What we found in that shaft didn't belong to any time or species I've ever studied, and I was warned not to keep asking questions." The strange didn't stop there. When preservationists attempted to restore the Briar Creek Chapel in 2009, they uncovered carvings beneath the church Pewstin etchings, previously hidden under layers of paint and dust. The symbols formed no known language. Some resembled Old Hebrew or early Aramaic, but many were unique, geometric, swirling like a written rhythm. Linguists brought in to study them couldn't identify a root structure, but a sound engineer who had accompanied the team claimed that, when traced slowly by hand in a specific pattern, the symbols emitted vibrations barely audible to the human ear, but enough to register on a spectrometer. One historian, Mara Ellison, later said, "It was as if the wood remembered the frequency, like it was waiting for someone to activate it again." In 2010, A group of amateur radio enthusiasts attempted to document the electromagnetic profile of the Briar Creek site. What they found astonished them. Within a 1-mile radius of the town's remains, their radios began picking up non-standard frequencies, low hums that fluctuated rhythmically. One even captured what sounded like a voice buried in static. When slowed down and reversed, the voice whispered, "Asterisk still here. Still below, still listening. Asterisk, no origin point could be identified." The signal came from everywhere, as if the air itself was transmitting. Another radio tech suffered severe nosebleeds after prolonged exposure to the signal. His ears bled. He collapsed on the return hike. He recovered, but refused to ever speak about what he'd heard. More evidence emerged in fragments. In 2012, a former FEMA contractor leaked photographs taken during the initial 1978 survey of the town. Among them was an image of a hidden compartment beneath the Harper residence's fireplace. Inside were dozens of small bones charred, arranged in a spiral, each one marked with thin copper wire. The image was quickly dismissed as a hoax, but photoanalysis confirmed the film stock was authentic to the era. One final artifact, discovered in 2015 by a relic hunter, was a broken shard of glass with a hand-painted eye on its rounded by 3 concentric rings. It matched a drawing found in Mae Thurston's journal from 1978. In the margin of her notebook, beneath the same symbol, she had written, "Asterisk, they never sleep. They are not past. They are beneath." Asterisk, these details, chilling, disparate, but eerily. A line suggests a hidden ritual infrastructure beneath. Briar Creek, a pattern of belief and behavior that went far beyond isolation or religious fervor. It hints at preparation, devotion, and an understanding of something other, something ancient, tied to the land, that the villagers were not just hiding from, but perhaps serving. Whether these findings are proof of that, or simply the remnants of mass hysteria, remains debated. But one thing is certain: the deeper we dig into Briar Creek, the more it becomes clear the town may be gone, but it left something behind. Throughout the ruins of Briar Creek, beneath the dust, the silence, and the rot, one thing continued to appear: symbols, carved into doorframes, burned into floorboards, etched faintly onto windowsills, with what appeared to be bone or stone. They weren't random. They followed a pattern, a language of fear, devotion, or invocation. And the most prominent of them all was the same looping spiral and Ouroboros-style symbol, twisted into a figure 8 that never closed. The villagers had a name for it: the Oropath. Narrator, asterisk, the Oropath, a symbol of eternal return, was etched into multiple homes, always paired with the word reverse. Asterisk, every time the symbol appeared, it was accompanied by that word, not written as part of a sentence, but as a command: reverse, painted backward on cellar doors, stamped upside down behind mirrors. In Claire Harper's personal notebook, later recovered from Western State Hospital, the Oropath was scrawled 31 times on a single page, with reverse underlined in crimson. The ink was not pen. Forensic testing revealed it was dried blood. The meaning of the symbol is debated. Some believe it represents an attempt to escape linear time and eternal return to a moment before the hollowing, a ritualistic undoing of fate. Others argue it was a sigil of submission, an offering to whatever force the townspeople believed lived beneath their feet. Either way, it wasn't passive. It was inscribed with care, sometimes hidden in places no visitor would find beneath stairwells, under bed frames, or behind kitchen cabinets. They weren't trying to frighten. They were trying to protect themselves. Local drawings found among the town's remnants further deepened the mystery. Many depict humanoid forms, but grotesquely altered, beings with twisted limbs bent at impossible angles, mouths not where they should be. Most unsettling of all, many had multiple eyes, 3 stacked vertically, or 7 circling the crown of the head like a halo. One charcoal drawing by a child, found under the schoolhouse floorboards, shows a group of these figures standing in a circle, arms extended, surrounding a smaller human form kneeling with its face erased. Written above them in a child's hand, asterisk, they know who we were. Asterisk, these weren't isolated artistic flares. Anthropologists who later studied the town's iconography found eerie parallels to ancient Appalachian folk rituals, many predating Briar Creek itself. In the remote hills of West Virginia, old families whispered of the feasts of the Veil, midnight gatherings said to occur on specific lunar dates. Participants wore white, ate nothing, and chanted names they were forbidden to write down. Those who disappeared during these nights were said to have been chosen or unmade. They weren't mourned. They were remembered in silence. One chant, passed down orally for generations, warned, asterisk, do not light the 3rd candle. She will see it, she who listens, she who waits. This brings us to another thread winding through the fabric of Briar Creek's cryptic practices, the Pale Mother asterisk. In Appalachian myth, the Pale Mother is an unnamed, faceless presence, neither divine nor demonic, but something older. She is said to live beneath the earth, beneath the roots, beneath memory. She is not evil, she is necessity. She feeds on forgetting, as one elder once put it, and offers peace through erasure. Those who serve her vanish not in body, but in meaning. Their names are unspoken. Their pasts dissolve. They become echoes. Several Briar Creek journals reference her indirectly. One entry from Ezekiel Harper reads, asterisk, the children were restless. They heard her teeth in the stone. We must give gladly, or she will take without asking. Another resident, Agatha Linwood, scribbled the same line in the margins of her hymnal 27 times. Asterisk, the pale one loves the hollowed. Asterisk, even the town's architecture appeared to follow ritualistic alignments. Drone scans conducted in 2009 revealed that several homes were positioned in perfect radial symmetry around the old chapel, which sat directly atop a fault line known to emit low magnetic frequencies. The homes formed a sigil subtle, invisible from the ground, but unmistakable from above. A glyph, a summoning diagram, or a containment ring. What's most chilling is the silence that surrounds all this. These weren't open rituals. They weren't performed in daylight. They were embedded into the bones of the town, the shape of the land, the language of the people. The symbols weren't warnings to outsiders. They were reminders to each other, rules, codes, maybe even prayers. So many unanswered questions remain. Why the emphasis on reversal? What were they trying to undo? Who or what were they feeding? And if they believed their rituals worked, what happened when they failed? Briar Creek was not a village that lost its way. It was a village that followed its path willingly, and to the end, the Oro path. The Pale Mother, the Hollow, all pointing in the same direction downward. From a psychological standpoint, what happened in Briar Creek defies simple categorization. It is, as Dr. Elaine Beringer, clinical psychologist and trauma specialist, once described, asterisk, a Gordian knot of human vulnerability, belief systems, and environmental catalysts. But to begin understanding it, we must ask an uncomfortable question, asterisk, could an entire village, 31 individuals, spanning ages, roles, and relationships, succumb to a singular psychological break? Could belief alone make people vanish? Narrator: could an entire village succumb to psychological manipulation, or was something deeper at play? Shared trauma, ancestral memory, or belief weaponized? Experts have long debated the concept of mass delusion, often referred to in academic circles as mass psychogenic illness, or MPI. It's a phenomenon wherein groups of people, under emotional or environmental stress, begin to experience shared symptoms, hallucinations, or behaviors without any physical cause. It's been documented in schools, religious movements, and in closed communities, but never, at least not credibly, to the extent of an entire village erasing itself without violence or migration. Dr. Martin Shaw, a cognitive behavioral researcher who spent years studying fringe cults and isolationist religious movements, believes Briar Creek represents an extreme case of ideological fusion disorder, where identity is so tightly bound to a belief system that individuals lose the ability to distinguish their own will from that of the group. In these conditions, Shaw notes, the impossible becomes possible. A person doesn't just believe, they become the belief. And if the belief says to vanish, they will. But belief alone doesn't make people disappear physically. That's where others, like Dr. Hannah Ree, look to environmental and sensory manipulation as a potential catalyst. In a controversial but increasingly studied field, Dr. Ree and others are exploring how infrasound, low-frequency sound waves just below the threshold of human hearing can influence mood, perception, and cognitive stability. Infrasound can cause unease, disorientation, even hallucinations, she explains. It's been recorded in natural phenomena, earthquakes, cave systems, even decaying industrial equipment. But if weaponized intentionally or present naturally over time in isolated communities, it could create a sustained neurological effect, a kind of shared unreality. This concept gains eerie support from field data recovered near Briar Creek, where researchers detected ambient infrasound levels well above typical background readings. The source was never confirmed, though the town sat atop a known geological fault and several abandoned mining shafts, both capable of amplifying natural acoustic phenomena. If infrasound distorted perception, could it have been the spark that lit the powder keg? Dr. Sylvia Manette, a cult deprogrammer who's worked with survivors of groups like Heaven's Gate and the Family International, suggests that environmental stimuli only deepen the roots of indoctrination already present. Briar Creek wasn't a typical town, she says. It was a generational sect likely indoctrinated since birth into a worldview of apocalyptic prophecy, isolation, and divine consequence. In that context, trauma isn't an event. It's the air they breathe. Manette points to the concept of generational brainwashing, the idea that belief systems, if reinforced over decades without interruption, can become neurologically hardwired. Children born into these environments grow up absorbing not just doctrine, but fear, ritual, and identity as a singular, undivided thing. There is no outside world. There is only the path, the ritual, the consequence of deviation. One psychiatrist reviewing Claire Harper's audio journals concluded that her speech patterns resembled those of trauma-induced aficionat because of a physical brain injury, but from prolonged exposure to cognitive dissonance and terror. Claire, born into Briar Creek, vanished for 48 hours, then returned unable to form full sentences. Her only coherent phrase asterisk, "They're not who you think they are," asterisk reads like a fracture line in her reality. Could the same thing have happened to everyone else? Some theories go further, invoking ancestral memory, a controversial idea that traumas and fears can be biologically encoded into human genetics, passed from one generation to the next. Dr. Theo Lenger, a neurohistorian, argues that in places like Briar, Creek founded by spiritual exiles, built on prophecy, and shaped by extreme isolation, those inherited fears could resurface under the right conditions. It's not ghosts, Langer says. It's psychological momentum. The past doesn't haunt you, it inhabits you. But not all experts place the blame solely on internal dynamics. There's a darker suggestion offered by former military psychologist Dr. Robert Hask, who worked under classified behavioral research during the Cold War. Hask proposes that certain mind control programs, such as MK-Ultra and Artichoke, were never entirely shut down, and that isolated communities, like Briar Creek, were sometimes used for field experiments involving frequency exposure, drug-laced water systems, and sensory disruption. He points to declassified memos referencing Phase 6 of behavioral interruption via ritualized environments, and locations that match Appalachian coordinates. Why would you run experiments in a city, Hask argues, when you could do it in a town no one maps, that no one visits, and that doesn't trust outsiders, while no concrete link has ever been proven? The government's ongoing refusal to declassify Major Briar Creek files and the alleged presence of Defense Intelligence Agency personnel during the original investigation has only fueled speculation. Perhaps the most terrifying theory isn't rooted in mysticism or science, but in synthesis. What if it wasn't one cause? What if Briar Creek was the perfect storm? A generationally isolated group raised on visions of reckoning, saturated in folklore that warns of disappearance, exposed to low-frequency vibrations from deep earth, movements, possibly nudged, even subtly, by external forces, be they governmental or environmental, and bound together by a communal belief so absolute that when the time came, they didn't run, they welcomed it. Whatever it was, in the end, the psychology of Briar Creek may not be reducible to a singular answer. It may live in the uncomfortable space between explanation and myth, between brain chemistry and belief, between what people fear and what they create from that fear. As Dr. Beringer quietly put it, flipping through the last pages of Claire's redacted file. This wasn't madness. It was alignment. A whole town pointed toward one idea, and when they were ready, they went where that idea led them. Whether that place was real or imagined, this much remains. They never came back, and maybe they never meant to. Timeline. Reconstructed, December 18th, 1977. To January 13th, 1978, narrator, from December 18th, when lights were first reported in the woods, to January 13th, when silence fell. Here's what we now believe happened. The unraveling of Briar Creek didn't occur all at once. It was gradual, surgical, like the slow dimming of a lantern in a deep mine, where each flicker is felt in the bones before the eyes, when experts, journalists, and survivors of nearby counties pieced together logs, journals, weather patterns, and whispered recollections, a chilling sequence began to form. Not every hour is accounted for. Not every record was preserved. But enough remains to tell a story. A countdown. December 18th, 1977. The first sighting. Residents begin reporting faint lights moving unnaturally in the woods surrounding the town, amber orbs that drift above the treetops and vanish when approached. Some say they're stars, reflected in fog. Others believe they're watchers. Claire Harper, in a later audio tape, names them the eyes of her hands. December 21st, the winter solstice. Livestock is found mutilated in the Linwood family barn. No blood, clean cuts, no footprints in the snow leading in or out. That night, Ezekiel Harper's sermon reportedly shifts in tone. He speaks of reversal and a time of unmaking. The congregation, once vibrant, begins thinning. December 23rd, first behavioral shifts. Sheriff Arlen Booker visits Briar Creek for a welfare check after a traveling salesman fails to return home. He notes in his log that windows are boarded from the inside and no one answers their doors. Candles are seen burning inside homes at midday. He records a single note, *town quiet. Too quiet. The log shows a 4-hour gap in his report, with no explanation. December 25th, Christmas Day. No decorations, no carols, no gifts exchanged, according to Claire's recovered journal. She writes, *, we were told not to mark the birth this year, only the return. That night, a radio transmission from a nearby ranger station picks up a garbled voice saying, "Reverse, reverse, the path is open." December 28th, the last known outsider contact, mail deliveries stop. The last delivery driver to enter the town claims he was told by a woman with a veil over her face that the village has turned inward now. He never delivers again. His truck was found years later, half buried in ice with an unopened sack of letters all addressed to Briar Creek residents. January 1st, 1978, New Year's Day, the town doesn't celebrate. A child's diary, later found frozen under floorboards, notes that the school was closed forever now, and that the teacher won't stop crying even when no one's around. Several clocks in the schoolhouse are discovered stopped at 3:33 a.m. January 3rd, power outage. Multiple residents document the entire town losing power simultaneously despite each home running on independent coal generators. Candles return. Shadows are reportedly seen moving against walls without a source. That night, Ezekiel gives a sermon in complete darkness. The theme, the undoing must be willing. January 6th, Claire disappears at 10:44 p.m. Claire Harper is last seen walking into the forest barefoot, wearing only a nightgown. Witnesses say she was drawn, as if listening to something. She is gone for 2 days. Her return, on January 8th, is unannounced. She arrives at her grandfather's cabin and collapses, uttering only *, "They're not who you think they are." She is taken to Western State Hospital under heavy sedation. Her admission records are later sealed. January 9th, Sermon of Silence. No one speaks in the chapel that evening. Witnesses through second-hand testimony report the congregation sat for over 2 hours in utter silence, each holding a small mirror turned downward. A single candle was extinguished every 5 minutes. January 10th, attempted escape. The Manners family is seen fleeing in their vehicle at dawn. The car is found 3 hours later by a riverbank, doors open, engine still running, radio emitting high-pitched static. No sign of the family is ever found. In town, no one acknowledges their absence. January 11th, the dead radio. All local radio signals go silent. Transmitters found years later show no mechanical fault. One final broadcast is recorded at 2:16 a.m. A low hum followed by a woman's voice whispering in reverse, then a phrase distorted by static. Asterisk, the mother takes her children home. Asterisk, 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 January 12th, asterisk, asterisk, final known movement. Forest Ranger Raymond Kell files. A partial report of strange shadows on the ridge and a pressure in the air that isn't weather. His snowmobile is later found overturned. His watch is frozen at 11:47 p.m. Asterisk, asterisk, January 13th, 1978. The vanishing. Asterisk, asterisk, at approximately 6:03 a.m. The first state responders arrive in Briar Creek following a formal request by Sheriff Booker, marked urgent. They find 29 homes. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Fires still burning. Meals set at tables. Doors unlocked. Beds unmade. The village is silent. Clocks throughout town showed different times, some stopped, some spinning wildly, some counting backward. One fireplace has a message etched into the stone above it, barely visible in ash. Asterisk, she is beneath. She is always. Narrator, patterns in daily routines suddenly shift. Final sightings match lunar cycle. Gaps in police logs unaccounted. 4-hour windows. Every second counts differently in Briar Creek. Asterisk time in the final weeks no longer moved in straight lines. Diaries repeat dates. Watchers skip forward, then back. And in the last 2 days, every mechanical device, radios, clocks, cameras malfunctioned in ways never explained. The reconstructed timeline does not answer everything, but it does draw a shaper, narrowing spiral toward a moment of perfect silence, a ritual countdown, a vanishing foretold not in words, but in absences, in shadows, in silence. And when the final second fell, so did Briar Creek today. Briar Creek is more myth than memory. A scar in the Appalachian wilderness, swallowed by trees, silence, and official warnings. The roads leading to the village have long since eroded into the landscape, overgrown and barricaded by rusted government fencing. Signs warn of unstable terrain, dangerous wildlife, and active geological hazards, though no such hazards have ever been documented in the area. Locals say the warnings aren't for safety, they're for secrecy. Narrator : today. Briar Creek is inaccessible. Government property. No trespassing. But the air still feels heavy, like someone is watching. Satellite images show little, just dense forest, shadowed ridges, and a pale clearing where the chapel once stood. But those who've gotten close, hikers, explorers, and the rare thrill-seeking documentarian, describe something more visceral, a pressure in the air, an unnatural quiet. Even birds seem to avoid the canopy above the ruins. One man who hiked within a mile of the site in 2016 claimed his compass spun erratically and his ears began to ring until he turned back. Another described feeling watched by something that didn't blink. These stories never make headlines, but they persist. The site is officially under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Department of the Interior, though a Freedom of Information Act request revealed the land's control was temporarily transferred to a now-defunct private defense contractor. In the early 2000s, why a military contractor was given access to a collapsed town site remains unanswered. Claire Harper, the last known voice of Briar Creek, vanished in 2003. She had been living under a pseudonym in Roanoke, Virginia, working as a night custodian at a local university library. In her final years, she was reclusive, known to scribble symbols into The margins of returned books and speak in riddles no one understood. One co-worker recalled seeing her tear out the final pages of any book that ended with the word return. On March 21st, 2003, Claire left her apartment and never came back. Her door was locked from the inside. The only thing missing was a framed photos of her grandfather, Ezekiel Harper, and a small, spiral-shaped charm she always wore around her neck. A week later, her voicemail recorded one final call, a garbled message, never traced, that ended with the words, asterisk, she remembers. So must we, asterisk, her body was never found. Of the other descendants of Briar Creek's 31 residents, few remain. Most have changed their names. None have agreed to interviews. One, a man believed to be the grandson of the Linwood family, allegedly moved to northern Maine and has lived off-grid ever since. A journalist who attempted to contact him in 2011 found his cabin abandoned. The walls covered in black paint. On the ceiling, carved with a pocket knife, were the words, asterisk, we went backward. They followed. Asterisk, in 2017, a documentary crew dispatched a drone over the coordinates of Briar Creek. Within 3 minutes of flight, the drone signal was lost completely. No feed, no telemetry, no return. The crew followed standard recovery protocols and trekked into the outer edge of the woods to retrieve it. They found nothing. Not the drone, not a trace of it despite GPS marking its last known position. The forest, one of them said, felt like it folded over the sky. The team abandoned the project. One member later posted anonymously online, stating, asterisk, we went looking for a dead town, but it's not dead, it's dreaming, and we awoke something. Up, asterisk, today, the Briar Creek site is watched not officially, but vigilantly. Conspiracy forums host grainy maps. Late-night radio callers whisper about the town that reversed itself. Some believe the villagers entered a parallel realm. Others insist it was an ascension. Still more fear it was a practice run some orchestrated, repeated, hidden in plain sight. But no two stories ever align. That's how the mystery protects itself, in pieces, in confusion, and that's the most chilling part. Briar Creek didn't vanish into legend. It fractured into so many versions of itself the truth became unreachable. And somewhere in that fracture, it waits. The cemetery still exists, overgrown, moss-covered, and tilted with time. The names on the gravestones were legible match. No official birth or death records. Some stones are blank. Others etched only with symbols or single words. Asterisk, before, below, reverse. Asterisk, the chapel, burned, yes, but not destroyed. The frame remains, charred, blackened, leaning into itself like a structure trying to collapse but forever suspended. A skeleton of belief, and beneath its altar, sealed under layers of melted wax and rusted metal, is a hatch that no one has been able to open. No one who's tried has returned, so we're left with questions. What did the people of Briar Creek believe? What did they see in those final days? And did they leave the world, or rewrite it? The deeper one looks, the less it feels like a mystery and more like a message, not just from the past, but from a place beneath time. Something untouched, undying, and perhaps the most terrifying thought of all isn't that we'll never know what happened. It's that one day we will. Narrator, asterisk, we revisit each theory, not for answers, but for what remains unanswered. Asterisk, by this point, the story of Briar Creek is no longer about what happened. It's about what still defies explanation. Each theory, no matter how implausible or conflicting, survives because of one simple truth. Nothing has ever been proven false. The bodies were never found. The signals remain. The land is sealed, and the silence around the case is more persistent than the whispers inside it. So we return to the beginning, to the competing explanations that have tried and failed to untangle what occurred between December 1977 and January 1978. We begin with the most widely accepted and the most chilling in its humanity: the cult ritual theory. This theory posits that the entire town of Briar Creek was a generational cult, descended from the Millerite movement and steeped in Appalachian folk mysticism. The sermons, the rituals, the isolated structure of the town all point to a deeply insular belief system that may have culminated in a mass voluntary disappearance. Not a suicide, necessarily, but an event, a ritualized vanishing tied to celestial patterns, as evidenced by the lunar alignment on January 13th. Prose, the abundance of symbolic carvings, synchronized behavior, and documented history of similar rituals in Appalachian folklore support this. So do the writings of Ezekiel Harper, who preached often about cleansing, unmaking, and the Oro path. Cons: no bodies were found, no signs of panic or violence. Ritual mass suicides usually leave physical evidence. Here there was none. And if this was a spiritual departure, how did it leave behind such tangible anomalous symbols, infrasound, and electromagnetic disturbances? From there, we enter murkier territory, the external force theory. This idea suggests that the town came into contact with something outside of human understanding, other, alien, interdimensional, or rooted in forgotten forces of nature. The glowing lights, the unexplained symbols, the distorted time perception, and, most notably, the lack of decomposition or decay fires still burning, food still warm, all hint at an abrupt and unnatural interference. Prose: the pattern of vanishings, electromagnetic disruptions, and strange sounds mirrors phenomena reported in other paranormal cases, from the Dyatlov Pass incident to the Tunguska blast. Witnesses who approached the town years later described feelings of being watched, as if something still lingered. Cons: this theory depends heavily on speculative physics and fringe science. No hard data confirms the existence of an external entity or force at play. It's compelling, but ultimately unprovable. Next is the theory rooted in psychology and biology. Asterisk, asterisk, mass psychogenic illness or psychological warfare. Asterisk, asterisk, in this view, the people of Briar Creek didn't vanish physically, they fractured psychologically. The town, under constant stress, isolation, and possibly influenced by environmental factors like infrasound, may have succumbed to mass delusion or shared psychosis. If such a state were manipulated, intentionally or not, it could explain synchronized behavior, speech patterns, and disappearances. Prose: mass hysteria has historical precedent. Add in sound frequencies known to cause disorientation and hallucination, and the village's behavior begins to resemble extreme cases of psychogenic fugue. Cons: again, no bodies, no survivors, and the environmental triggers, while unsettling, enough to explain the total, permanent vanishing of an entire population. Even in the most severe mass hysteria cases, people eventually return. Briar Creek never did. Then we look to the ever-present shadow in American mystery lore, Asterisk, asterisk, the government cover-up theory. Asterisk, asterisk, in this model, Briar Creek became a test site either by accident or designed for classified psychological or technological experiments. Whether through MK Ultra-style mind control, environmental manipulation, or a failed containment protocol, the village's fate was sealed not by belief, but by bureaucracy. Prose, redacted files, signed evacuation orders from a man dead since 1972, the presence of federal agents at the site, the suppression of Claire Harper's records, the drone interference, the private defense contractor who temporarily controlled the land, all point towards something being hidden and actively cons. No whistleblowers have come forward. No documents have ever conclusively linked Briar Creek to military operations. And most importantly, why this town? Why 31 people, unless they were chosen precisely because no one would notice? An offshoot of this theory, though even more unsettling, is the synthetic ritual hypothesis that the government, or another power, created the belief system within Briar Creek over generations as part of an experiment in long-form indoctrination. That the town was a controlled environmental religion as a petri dish. In that case, the disappearance wasn't a glitch. It was the final phase. And yet, another theory remains. Less discussed. More abstract, belief-based manifestation. This posits that the people of Briar Creek believed so deeply in the mythos of the Hollow, the Pale Mother, and the Oro Path that they collectively manifested an outcome beyond explanation. That belief was not a symptom of their fate, but the vehicle of it, a psychic event, a collapse of consensus reality, not a disappearance, but a transference. Prose. The power of belief is well documented in religious ecstasy, placebo effect, even psychosomatic illness. If amplified communally and reinforced by trauma and isolation, could it generate physical phenomena? The towns, symbols, the clocks, the spoken word, reverse, the alignment, all seem orchestrated. Cons, it borders on mysticism. There is no scientific framework for collective belief altering the physical world. Yet in Briar Creek, every accepted model, scientific, psychological, spiritual, fails so. Which is it? A mass cult act of ritual vanishing, an abduction by forces unknown, a failed psychological experiment, a spontaneous rupture of reality caused by belief. Each theory, on its own, is lacking. Each explains part of the truth, but none account for it all. No single lens is wide enough, and perhaps that's the final, most terrifying possibility. Asterisk, asterisk, what if all of them are true? Asterisk, asterisk, what if Briar Creek was the epicenter of a perfect convergence? A psychologically vulnerable group, living in a geologically active region, shaped by generations of ritual and secrecy, studied perhaps, manipulated by entities larger than we know, until something tipped, something broke, and the town, rather than die, inverted dot reverse. The word echoes again from stone, from fire, from Claire, not gone, not dead, just reversed, which leaves us here, looking into the hollow where a village once stood, where time doesn't tick dot, where clocks spin the wrong way, where stories don't end, but fold inward. Briar Creek may not be a place anymore. It may be a loop, a lesson, or a warning. And if so, then we're not looking at a mystery. We're looking at a mirror. Narrator, asterisk, Briar Creek isn't alone. Asterisk across the map spanning centuries and continents, there are whispers of other places, other disappearances, other silences, too perfect to be accidents. Briar Creek may feel unique in its detail, in its darkness, but the further we pull back, the more it becomes clear. It is part of a pattern, a global thread of vanishing point dots, connected not by culture or climate, but by the eerily familiar symptoms they leave behind: the suddenness, the symbols, the silence, and the absence where life once stood. In the frozen depths of Soviet Russia lies one of the most studied mysteries of the modern age: the Dyatlov Pass incident. 1959. 9 experienced hikers vanish in the Ural Mountains. When search teams arrive, they find their tent ripped open from the inside. Bodies are scattered across the snow, some barefoot, others with massive internal injuries and no external trauma. Radiation traces are found on their clothing. One woman is missing her tongue. No signs of foul play, just a desperate flight from something unseen. And most chillingly, the forest near their last campsite was said to hum at night. Strange lights danced over the trees. The Mansi people of the region called the area Holat Shal, the mountain of the dead. Thousands of miles away, in the Canadian wilderness, lies the legend of Anjakuni village. 1930, a remote Inuit settlement reportedly discovered completely empty by a fur trapper. Tents still standing, fires smoldering, meals half-eaten, dogs dead, still tied to posts. But the people, dozens of them, were gone. No footprints, no struggle, just snow and the wind. The trapper swore he heard a low hum-like singing before he saw the village. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated their records. Missing, redacted, or discredited. Officially, it never happened. Then there's Roanoke, the lost colony of early America. 1587, over 100 settlers gone without explanation. The only clue, a single word carved into a tree, Croatoan. No bodies, no graves, no signs of war or migration. Theories have ranged from native integration to disease to starvation, but none explained the finality, the totality of their disappearance. Like Briar Creek, Roanoke leaves behind a void to complete, to clean, to be natural. In Hoja Baciu Forest, Romania, strange disappearances are more recent and more consistent. A dead zone in the forest's center refuses to grow. Vegetation. People report memory loss, rashes, vertigo. Cameras malfunction. Time moves strangely. In 1968, a military technician photographed a flying disc above the forest canopy, one of the earliest clear UFO images in Eastern Europe. Locals tell of a shepherd who vanished with 200 sheep. Never found, no remains. Just echoing bleats on still nights. And these aren't the only ones. Lake Anjakuni, the Flannan Isles, the MV Joyita, the village of Kalmanskop, the disappearances. In Alainmore, the vanishing ship crew of the Carol Adering, from Japan's Aokigahara, forest where compasses spin and silence is oppressive, to the Bennington Triangle in Vermont, where hikers vanish without a trace. The hallmarks are consistent, sudden, disappearances, unfinished routines, distorted time, unnatural silence, and sometimes symbols. In 1975, a group of spelunkers in France disappeared for 22 hours inside the Grotte de la Pierre Saint-Martin cave system. When they returned, their watchers were all off by hours, some forward, some backward. One had carved a spiral into the wall. None remembered doing it, In the Brazilian town of Ouro Preto, known for its colonial churches and underground tunnels, reports of reverse speaking and looping behavior surfaced during the 1980s. Children were said to draw beings with long limbs and many eyes, echoing the sketches found in Briar Creek, the town's mental health facility. Built in 1893, suffered a fire in 1987. All patient records before that date were destroyed. Local legend holds that those patients spoke of a woman beneath the stone, who called to them during lunar eclipses. In North Queensland, Australia, the Yirganiji people tell of the time that folded, a night when a tribal outpost in the rainforest vanished. Only the campfires remained. The elders still refuse to speak of that event. They believe the forest sometimes takes not out of malice, but hunger. And then there's the Nazca lines in Peru, geoglyphs, so large they can only be viewed from the air. Among the many animal shapes is one curious, often overlooked figure, a spiral with the word retino etched beside it in early colonial Spanish. Return, or perhaps reverse. It all leads back to a terrifying thought. What if these aren't isolated events? What if they're symptoms of a condition we don't yet understand? Places where the fabric of time, belief, and perception thins just enough for something else to slip through, or for something human to slip away. Narrator, asterisk, same signs, sudden vanishings, strange lights, silence, symbols. Asterisk, the skeptics call it coincidence, pattern seeking, behavior, our minds projecting order onto chaos. But even they can't explain the repetition, the synchronicity. Why so many of these disappearances occur near fault lines, magnetic anomalies, or locations with rich oral mythologies. Why the symbols recur: spirals, inverted crosses, looped sigils. Why the last words, recorded etched, or whispered always, hint at motion, reverse, return, go back. Briar Creek may be the most documented, the most recent, the most dissected, but it is not the first, and it will not be the last. Whatever happened in that frozen town in 1978 has happened before, elsewhere, in other forms, under other names, and if we're not careful it may happen again. The forest has reclaimed it now. Trees curl through broken windows, moss crawls across crumbled stone, and the last rusted mailbox stands like a sentry no one remembers placing. There are no footprints, no sounds, just wind, and that feeling, the weight of eyes without a gaze. Briar Creek, West Virginia, is not on maps. It's not in travel guides. It does not appear on satellite coordinates without error. And if you ask the state, it never existed at all. But it did. 30-1 people lived here, ate here, prayed here, and vanished here. Narrator, asterisk, the village is gone, but the silence remains, and it speaks. In the shadows of forgotten places, in the stories we dismiss, in the questions we dare not ask. Asterisk, what happened on that cold January night in 1978 has no definitive answer, only echoes. Some say the villagers were taken, others say they left willingly. Some believe the town reached a spiritual event, others call it a massacre dressed in ritual. The only certainty is absence, and that absence speaks louder than any record, any sermon, any theory, for those who dare to approach. The ruins, those few hikers, researchers, trespassers, there are recurring reports. Radios lose signal, compasses freeze, clocks stop or spin backwards, most turn around. A few go silent. But all agree there is a presence here. Not of the dead, but of the unresolved. And isn't that the true terror? Not a ghost story, not a monster in the woods, but something deeper. A question with no ending. A disappearance with no cause. A truth that refuses to be pinned down because to name it might invite it closer. The sermons Ezekiel Harper once gave are long gone. Their pages rotted away with time. But one line, scribbled in the back of a hymn book recovered from the chapel ruins, remains legible. Faded ink, uneven handwriting. It reads, **, she waits not in death, but in the spaces we leave unguarded. **, Briar Creek forces us to confront something we often ignore. What we don't understand doesn't go away. It lingers in old churches, in dreams passed down through generations. In the flicker at the edge of our vision we always dismiss as nothing. But what if it's not nothing? What if stories like Briar Creek's are warnings not from the supernatural, but from ourselves? Cautionary tales about the cost of turning inward too far, of isolating belief, of letting myth become doctrine, of letting silence become survival. Or worse, what if Briar Creek wasn't unique? What if it's just one name in a long list of places we were never meant to find? What if the event didn't happen to them, but through them? And what if that event is still happening slowly, quietly, in towns just like this? Behind doors we don't knock on, behind curtains we're taught not to draw, because the evidence remains. The missing drone, the carved sigils, the overlapping disappearances across continents, the whispered warnings from Claire Harper, the word that appears again and again in journals, sermons, church pews, radio signals, and dreams reverse. Not forward, not transcend, not rise, reverse, go back, unmake, return to before. Whatever happened in Briar Creek wasn't a message to us. It was us, our fear, our obsession with purity, with belonging, with explanations that fit inside our comfort zones. And when none did, we buried the whole town under bureaucracy and frostbite and silence. But that silence hasn't held. Every so often, we hear something, static on a dead frequency, a child drawing a spiral in the dirt without knowing why. Hiker who comes home quiet, eyes glassy, whispering about eyes in the trees. Something happened in Briar Creek, and whatever it was, it remembered us. So we end here not with a theory, but a reflection. What truths are we leaving behind in the name of comfort? What horrors are we inviting by not asking the right questions? Briar Creek died in one night, but its mystery, its echo lives forever. Fade to black, whispers, static, then one final voice, distant but unmistakable, *, reverse.